Hey everyone, in this lesson we're going to talk about how camera shading panels work. So I've got the ATEM camera panel in front of me here, but really almost any live production camera shading system is going to look very similar to this in form and function. So let's walk through some basic functions of what this is and why you want one first. So the very first thing is you can see that I've got two cameras hooked up, camera 1, camera 2, and the other two panels are currently off. I can turn those on or off, but I don't have 4 cameras in the shoot, I only have 2, so I have camera 1, camera 2. I'm currently tallied on camera 1, which is why the ID on this is red and the ID on camera 2 is green. Green means it's safe to adjust the exposure on that camera without affecting what's live on air. If I cut to camera 2 on the switcher like I just did, you can see that camera 2 lights up red over here now. So camera 1, camera 2, camera 1, camera 2. So you can see those tally lights on the panel follow the tally lights on the switcher. Now going from top to bottom, the most important thing actually is not at the top, it's on the bottom. It's either a knob or a stick like this, and it's the iris. So you can see my f-stop on camera 1, the camera I'm talking to right now, is at f4.4. If I pull the stick down, the image is going to get darker as the iris closes. If I push the stick up, the camera and picture is going to get brighter as a result. So that's generally, once you have cameras looking the way they need to look, that's most of the work that's going to be done. You're going to be looking at the image critically and decide brightness values. You're going to be deciding on exposure based on brightness, up and down, up and down. Now, normally on a broadcast camera, a traditional television camera, you're not going to see these little clicks going up and down. I'm currently using a Blackmagic 6K Pocket Cinema camera, which is using an EF lens, a photographic lens. And the best that lens can do is make 1/3 stop increments at a time on the iris, which is why you see the clicking here. On a traditional TV camera, there's no clicks involved. It's just a generally free to rotate iris that slows down or closes down automatically or clicklessly, and you can have a really, really smooth thing. So I normally probably wouldn't adjust this live on the air like that. I wouldn't want our viewers to see that, but on a TV camera with a clickless iris, you can just very gently adjust the exposure as you need to when the camera is live. Now let's look at what else we have. So right below that, you have the iris, and now you've got master blacks. So now we're going to start dealing with the color or contrast of the image. The blacks are how deep the blacks are. So you can see if I lower the pedestal here, you see my value is going to -2, -3, -4. The blacks are getting very, very dark. The darkest parts of the image are going down. Now if I bring that up, we can see detail in the shadows, but the image can start getting milky. It looks like it's just kind of washed out everywhere. There's nothing that's truly black. So the values may again switch from camera to camera system. So Hitachis might be less sensitive. You might need a bigger value in there. But generally speaking, you only want to deviate just a little bit, generally down a little bit to add a little more contrast in the image. If you really need to get into your shadows, if you're really looking into the dark, you might want to bring your pedestal up, this master black level. But generally, you're going to leave that right around 0 or just a little bit lower. So that's how the image looks there. The other things that you may need to get to quickly if you're shading the camera is right here, master gain. So currently, just so I can play with it, I've got the gain up. And if I go down, I can go in 1/3 stop increments, down or up. And again, that's going to be determined by which camera model you have connected to your switcher or which camera model you're communicating with. So a lot of cameras will have a gain knob that's +6, which is 1 stop, or +12, which is 2 stops. And they might not even go beyond that, but I can add in quite a bit of gain here. But the more gain that I add, the grainier the image is getting. And now if I'd adjust that down, the exposure looks the same, but I've introduced quite a bit of digital gain, so there's some noise in that image. So you don't want to ride this up. I'm just pulling that gain down, and now I'm going to compensate by putting the iris up. And you can see every click on the iris and every click of the gain, I have the exact same exposure, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to leave that open. I'm going to gain up just a little bit more. Okay, so now I'm kind of back to where I was there. The shutter is going to, again, adjust the shutter speed of the camera. Generally, we don't mess with that value. I'm currently shooting in 24p and using a 180-degree shutter rule. So I have a 1/48 of a second for my shutter and 1/24 of a second. So 180 or half of the time of the shutter to the exposure. Generally, you don't mess with that unless maybe there's a flicker you're trying to get rid of, something like that. Most video and electronic things operate at 60 hertz a second. And so every once in a while, you may need to change the shutter to 60 or some marginal fraction of that to maybe get like a rolling line out of an electronic computer screen, something like that. But generally, you don't mess with the shutter once it's set. You do your exposure through gain and iris and not through shutter. So finally, that brings us to the color offset. So this is where the painting of the camera actually happens. So first, white balance is how you want to start. You don't just want to start grabbing these knobs. Instead, I've got a white balance button here, and if I press and hold that button, the camera will white balance in camera and just get an approximation of a starting point. If I press and hold, you can see I'm at 4400, press 4450, and I can just increment up and down here, color temperature, and if I go down real far, you can see how it's getting blue. And if I go up, you can see how it's getting closer where I was here, so 4150. One other thing I didn't mention that's kind of cool is I've got this monitor set up here so I can see my image and kind of critically evaluate the exposure. Most of the time, if you press the stick, it will show that camera on your router panel. So there's a little preview button here, and you can press preview and make that route, which is pretty neat. Or you can press the stick itself. So if I press the stick down, it will change the source there. Let's go back to color. So in the color, I said I'm going to have a white balance, and from there, I can actually adjust the color. So let me go into my vector scope here, a little easier to see. So if we have a proper white balance like we have now, and I have a neutrally colored wall, the color should be right in the middle, and the colors are radiating out to yellow, red, magenta, blue, cyan, and green. So these knobs are going to, if I add red, it's going to go towards the red vector. If I take away green, it's going to go away from green towards magenta. So let's just play with that and see what happens here. I'm going to turn down red, and you can see it's going, the whole image, the whole plot is going towards cyan. It's going the opposite direction of red. If I take green and I add green, it's going to go toward the green vector over here. So turned it down, went towards magenta, turned it up, and it goes towards green. So if I have a white card in the frame, if I pull in some white here, now that's clearly not right. And instead of me actually, you can see it's headed towards cyan. So if I pull that picture out, you see this white card is the little blob right here. And I need to paint that back into position. So dealing with camera 1, I'm going to add some red. So I want to go towards the color cast. So there we go, that's pretty close. But I have a pretty distinct dot in between the white and the neutral gray on the wall. It's close, but I think what I want to do is, let's see, if I want to go, I want to either go away from blue or towards green a little bit. So I'm going to go towards, it's too much. They're really sensitive. Go up a little bit and take away some blue. And now that white is neutral. Another way that I could look at that is just go into a different view. So this is the vector scope, that's looking at colors. If I change my scope view from vector scope to parade, I can see what's happening on an individual color channel basis. This is red, green, and blue. And with the white card in here, you can see that the peak of this, so the red, green, and blue are very equal. So another way that you could paint is to look in the parade here. And if I'm taking away red, the red's going to go down, and the blue and green are going to stay the same. Now I'm trying to get those back to where they were. If I take away the blue, same thing happens. Now a lot of times you see the green channels changing there. Traditional video shading systems didn't even have a green knob. And modern ones have now added green. So it's a little easier to paint in either direction. But red and blue are actually tied to one another in such a way that you can get anywhere without having to mess with green. Some subcarrier signals and interesting old analog stuff used to be associated with the green channel, which is why you wouldn't adjust the green channel. You don't want to screw up all the other things in the signal. But you can still get to where you need to go. So if we go to the waveform, that's just brightness. It's looking at the brightness of the image here. But the vector scope is going to tell us mainly about color, and that's what I'm interested in now. So I've got good looking color. The other way that once a camera is looking pretty good, if you don't have a scope, like I have here, this waveform for brightness, I can see that my skin tones, the brightness of me, if I move back and forth here, you can see a little hump. That's me. Those are my hands moving back and forth. And you can see that 50%, the peak of my skin is at 60, 70 IRE. So I can actually go up from there if I want. And that's all the way open. So just for sake of demonstration here, I'm going to add some gain in. You can see the picture's getting brighter. My skin is, in my opinion, too dark, but or too bright, but I don't necessarily have another way of looking at it. So another view that we have is actually called false color. We can turn this on, get rid of the scope, look at the video signal. And in here you can see colors are being assigned to exposure. So anything that's pink here in the image is dark or nearly dark. And anything that has this tan color, it's like on the back of my hands, for example, and in my face, is proper exposure for skin. Now, if I pull down the gain a little bit, keep pulling that down, you can see the bright areas are getting smaller and smaller, and now it's getting pretty dark. So you can see I'm not getting the flesh tone color, and now I'm starting to get some flesh tone right there. And really, it's another way of looking at it. A lot of places will use false color as, we know that we've got color, right, and we're just adjusting for brightness. False color is another good way of doing it. So I want you to be aware of a mode like that. So now let's talk through some practical applications of using a panel like this. So not only is it fast to be able to route things to a monitor and being able to make really subtle adjustments and ride multiple values. I can change the brightness of 2 cameras at once, which I can't do in the software. I can get to where I want to go very, very quickly. But I can also have scene files. And let's talk about those real quick, because this is where another really powerful way of using a panel like this. So let's say this is our base exposure. I like what we have. This is a good way to start. So maybe this is our starting point. So what I'm going to do is press the store button until it lights up red. And then I'm going to say I like all the settings the way they are. And I'm going to hold and press the 1 button. So scene file now is lit up. And if I go and change the gain and I press scene file 1, it's going to bring that gain back down to where it was when we stored it. So similarly, I could really mess things up. I could change the shutter, the gain, the ND value, and put in all sorts of gross red, and I press scene file, press that once, and I'm back to where I was. Now, an interesting thing has happened. I turned up this knob, there we are. As soon as I touched it, it went back to the red value because this knob is saying, turn up the red value. But I don't always want that to happen. If I'm gonna use a scene file, there's absolute mode and there's relative mode. Absolute, so I'm relative right now, and absolute. So absolute says, soon as I make an adjustment, respect the position of the knob or of the software. And relative mode says, regardless of, let's say I goof all this up again, turn that red and I pull that back, it's not gonna, these aren't motorized knobs. So these knobs aren't gonna go back to where they originally were. So if I say, you know what, I want to pull just a little red out of there, my red knob is turned up, but I'm turning it down and it's relative from this position. So if you're having things jump around wildly on you and using scene files and you don't know why it's happening, it's because you're in absolute mode instead of relative mode. So generally I like to operate in absolute mode, make sure that all my knobs start at 0 and program things from there. But if you're going to use scene files, you're going to want to be in relative mode. Finally, let's look at how the iris stick works itself. So the lens I'm currently using is a f2.8 lens, so which is pretty common. It's a 24-70 Canon EF lens, maxes out at f2.8. But the stick by default here goes to 1.7. So I have all this kind of play and lag on the top end of the stick. And I'm not going to start irising anything down until I hit 2.8 because that's as wide as it can go. So sure, I can push it open, but nothing's going to happen. So the sensitivity and coarse buttons are going to help you from here on out. So what I can do is I can say how sensitive the stick is and where the top end starts. So if I go all the way to the top and I take this coarse, open or close, and I turn this down, it's going to make the top end of the stick only reach 2.8. That's as high as I can go, and that's the upper threshold for what I want. Now, say you've set your lights really specifically, or there's a certain value, you can actually make that lower. You could say, you know what, guys, I don't want anyone shooting anything over f4. So you can make the top of the stick f4 if you want, using that. And it's good to know that, so if you do need more ability to open that up, there it is. Now the sensitivity is another knob right here, and that's going to adjust how sensitive the stick is. So right now, if I turn the sensitivity all the way up, this is kind of dealing with the bottom end. So if you want to think about it as the coarse deals with the top end of the adjustment. So I'm going to take that down to 2.8. The sensitivity is when the stick is all the way down, how far can it go down? If you're dealing with someone or you're wanting to you have a pretty specific range, if you want to make your stick less sensitive, now I can only go from 2.9 to 6.9. So it gives me a gentler adjustment. I'm not going to be able to close it all the way. But again, you want to know how this works so that if you need to close down the lens all the way, you can do it and not go, oh shoot, what's happening? So that's basically how a shading panel works. Hopefully, knowing what all these buttons and knobs do one by one helps you feel confident that you know how to approach this now. You can adjust for the brightness, you can adjust for color offsets, and you can set white balance. And if you can do that on this system, you can do it on just about any system. Thanks for watching.